Let's say you have a role-playing game where your character beats enemies, gains experience, and levels up. Now, a lot of games out there use a very similar kind of mechanic, and game developers, they don't try and create their own method of doing this. A lot of the times they will reuse an established pattern for this game leveling up mechanic. And this is something known as a design pattern. Hey guys, Kay here. Now, design patterns are something that you're probably already using, even if you're quite new to coding. Now, before we dive a little bit deeper into design patterns, what exactly is a design pattern? A design pattern is a commonly agreed on solution for some kind of software design problem. So let's revisit our role-playing game example. So obviously, being a game, you're probably going to be using some kind of controls. It might be a controller or your keyboard. So let's say on your keyboard you have the arrow keys that allow your character to move around. And let's say you have the spacebar where it allows your character to attack when you press it. Pretty much all games will have some kind of way of mapping a control to an action in the game, and this isn't something that game developers will try and figure out how to do on their own. There's already a commonly established pattern for this known as the command pattern. So design patterns, they're essentially common solutions that have been established through enterprise industry, and they're kind of there for people to use as a solution to a problem that they might have. And there's loads of different types of design patterns for different kind of use cases, but it's really good just to kind of know some basic ones when you're kind of starting your coding journey into, maybe getting a job. And just kind of being aware of, if you do have a solution, there might be a design pattern that already exists for it. So for those who are relatively new to coding, you're probably already using design patterns, like I said. So a common example, and this was probably one of my first examples, is when you're first learning to use the console and you're typing in hello world, and then you start to, pass in your own inputs and reprint that to the screen. So let's say you have a function which takes in your birthday, so birth year. So let's say I pass in my birth year 1990, and that function returns to me my age. So all it does is very basic, takes in my birth year and subtracts that from the current year that we're in, which would be 2020, so then it returns 30. And let's say you have a second function, and the role of that function is just to print to the screen a little message that says you are, and then the number of years that you pass in years old. So if I am 30 years old, then that function will accept 30 as an input, or whatever number it is that you calculate with your first method that uses your birthday, and then it prints that to the screen. So the first function will take my birth year as an input, 1990, and it will return 30, which would be my age in years. And then the second function will take that age in years, which is 30, as an input, and then output to the screen and through maybe a console.writeLine method, or print, or whatever language it is you're using, and it will simply write to the screen, you are 30 years old. Now that is an example of function chaining, and that's another design pattern, a very simple one, but you're probably already using that without realizing you're having an input from one function passed into another function. Now, for those of you coding out there who have got a little bit of experience with coding, and maybe you're making basic websites, basic web applications, my advice is to try using a design pattern known as MVC. And the reason I recommend that is because it's widely used across all tech stacks, all languages, and it's a really simple one. So MVC is Model View Controller. Your view is basically your HTML, your web page. Your model is kind of your backend logic, so maybe you've got some users which have like a name and maybe a birth year or something, some information associated with that in the database. And your controller is essentially, it tells your application what to show based off the URL that the person's visiting. So if they're visiting a home page, the controller is going to say, okay, let's render the HTML, the web page for the home page, and let's get a model of the user who's visiting and render that user's name to the screen. So it might say hello, welcome back, and then the person's name in front of the homepage. And that's something that you might see quite commonly in a lot of websites like Facebook, social media, kind of like email clients, all of that kind of stuff. So what I'll do is I'll include a link that I've used personally myself for a little bit more detail into design patterns that are beginner friendly. It's called Refactoring Guru. They do have some free resources. You do have to pay if you want to kind of get premium stuff, but to be honest, the free stuff is fine, just to get yourself a bit more of an introduction into using design patterns and just kind of how to explore and find design patterns for problems that you might have. The ultimate take-home advice for anyone who's coding out there is it's not necessarily the end game to get your application to work, but it's about how you architect it to make your application scalable. So how easy is it to extend your application in the future? How easy is it to test it? You can kind of get away with writing spaghetti code and just getting your application to work when you're a beginner, but as you kind of progress, it's really, really important to make your code scalable and extendable. That's what employers are going to be looking for when they give you these tech tests. It's not whether about your application works, it's about how you've architected it. And that's where, if you've got experience of using design patterns already, structuring your code correctly, then all of that stuff is going to be in your favor. So try building some projects, use the design patterns like I've said. Definitely try using MVC if you're new to design patterns, and try building maybe a basic website or web application and see where you get with that. So hope this was useful for you guys, and like always, please do like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. See ya.